Welcome in. You didn't find this by accident. This is the Whisper Lounge, a soft space for the conversations we weren't supposed to have. While you're here, you can leave a tip using the captivate.fm link in the show bio. And if you're ready, your complimentary 7-day exploration journal is waiting. Just head to whisperlounge.club/join to claim it and be one of the first to step inside to explore. Have you ever noticed that you tend to show up the same way in sex, even with different partners? Like maybe you're always the one giving, or maybe always the one leading, or you're the one who adapts to whoever you're with. I started noticing these patterns in myself long before I had language for them. And once I did, it changed how I understood my desire, and honestly, how I understood myself. And that leads me into this episode. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Whisper Lounge. This is the first episode in a series Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Whisper Lounge. In the last episode, we talked about the difference between erotic and arousal. Two things that get lumped together all the time. But from my perspective and my experience, they're really not the same. And I haven't heard anywhere else them be discussed or talked about separately. And separating things can be dangerous because I don't want to imply that these two concepts operate on their own. It's all integrated and connected, but looking at them separately allows us to really create more intentionally in each of these areas. Arousal is what turns you on. So let's talk about them separately for a second. So let's trust this process and let's talk about these two items separately. Arousal is what turns you on. Erotic is how you show up once you're there. And when you start to separate those two, a lot of things suddenly make more sense. Why sex feels alive sometimes and other times very confusing. Or why I can be turned on but still feel disconnected emotionally. Or why I can feel deeply connected but not actually aroused. So today I want to stay on the erotic side of that conversation. The shape your desire tends to take. This is where I introduce what I call the erotic archetypes. And I want to be really clear right up front. These are not rigid boxes. I want to be really clear right up front. And I want to be really clear right up front. These are not meant to be rigid boxes. These are definitely not diagnoses. These are not coming from a scientific, psychological background, although I have run them against some different theories and constructs. But these are not diagnoses. They're not, this is who you are forever. We talked about spectrum and fluidity in the first episode, and we'll revisit that often. We're always changing. They're more like patterns or tendencies, or maybe like familiar grooves you fall into when you're relaxed, when you're turned on, or when you're emotionally open. You might hear one and think, oh, wow, that's me. Totally relate to that. You might hear another one and think, that used to be me, and wow, I am not that way anymore. You might recognize yourself in several of them, which is absolutely possible, and that's all of that is normal. The point is not to label yourself. The point is awareness, because awareness is what gives you options, and options are what we get to create with. So let's walk through them together. Let's start with the giver archetype. So if this is you, your pleasure is deeply tied to someone else's pleasure. You light up when you're offering something, your touch, your attention, or your care. You're tuned in. You notice breath changes, subtle little reactions, little shifts that other people often miss. And there's something incredibly beautiful about that. Givers create safety. They make people feel held. They're often the ones others describe as quote unquote amazing lovers. But I'm also going to offer the shadow side of this. Givers can disappear. That's one of the shadows. You can get so good at focusing on the other person that you stop asking yourself what you want. Or you know what you want, but it feels a lot easier not to say it. So, and sometimes, honestly, it feels safer to give than to receive. My experience with givers has also shown that it's difficult for me to then shift into my giver archetype. The giver archetype doesn't come as naturally to me, so I want to consciously shift into it with partners. And if I'm with someone who is also a giver, I often don't know what they want, and it's almost difficult to read because they're not even expressing what they want, and they're not turned on by me giving. So that can be a shadow side as well. The other kind of perspective to the shadow is sometimes givers, and the complexity here will be seen in some of the other archetypes, but they're giving out of a desire to control. So they want to control, they want to dominate the situation, and we'll talk about that in another archetype. But they do that by giving. So when they're giving, they're in control. They're guiding, they're leading. So that can be another aspect of a giver. It can be the shadow. That can also be a strength. So, and the thing to remember for a giver is that you don't lose your magic when you learn to receive. You actually deepen it. Okay, let's talk about the second archetype, the driver. Drivers move things forward. We were kind of just talking about that a moment ago with the idea of control. If this is you, desire feels very active. You like to initiate, you like to set the pace. You feel alive when there's momentum. There's a lot of confidence here for a driver. There's a lot of clarity. There's kind of a I know what I want energy that can be incredibly attractive. But the shadow shows up when speed replaces attunement. So when you're moving fast, it's easy to miss those subtle cues. It's easy to assume someone is keeping up when they're actually unsure. This can be a situation where what does consent from your partner look like if you're going too fast and you're not even noticing that they've become unsure? Or to feel uncomfortable when you're not in control. Some drivers feel lost when they're not leading. To me, the driver archetype teaches two things at once: the power of initiative and the art of slowing down. When a driver pairs their fire with presence and consent, it's absolutely magnetic. I'm very attracted to a driver. and driving is very difficult for me. So I have a lot of complementary characteristics to this archetype. Then we have the explorer archetype. Explorers are guided by curiosity. If this is you, novelty matters. You love asking the question, well, what if we did this? Or what if? New dynamics, new ideas, new sensations. That is where your energy wakes up. It's what actually arouses you. Explorers bring a lot of playfulness and creativity into sex. They keep things from getting stale. The shadow side to the explorer is subtle. Sometimes novelty becomes a way to avoid depth. I mean, if you never stick with a particular skill or hobby and you just kind of gloss over it, all of your hobbies and skills are superficial and you never develop a mastery. If things start to feel emotionally vulnerable to an explorer, or quiet, or maybe just still, unmoving, it can be tempting to reach for the next new thing instead of staying in that place and diving a little bit deeper. I have to say that I don't relate as much to the explorer, although I have been around them, and I have friends who definitely would identify with this. And I have had also moments where I was just chasing a spark and trying something new. Um, I didn't necessarily experience the shadow side of it, but I have definitely tried new things and I enjoy trying new things. I would say though that I don't enjoy trying all new things, and I very much like doing some of the same things over and over again. What I've learned is that exploration doesn't always mean external newness. Sometimes the most unfamiliar territory is slowness or vulnerability, or letting yourself be seen. The next archetype, number 4, is the harmonizer. For harmonizers, sex without emotional connection feels flat. You need resonance, you need safety, a sense of being in sync before desire really even flows. Your arousal is not just physical, it's relational. And you're turned on by intimacy itself. And when it's there, it can feel incredibly deep and nourishing. So an example of this would be someone who is completely disinterested in a one-night stand. There needs to be more emotional depth. Another example of this would be in one-night stand, like a few that I've had, where there was a connection. I felt a sense of intimacy, but it was in that moment. I didn't have a need to create a long-term relationship. I truly didn't. And it wasn't just grab someone off the street, not even saying a word to him and having sex. There was a connection. There was some kind of connection in that moment, but it was very present-minded. It was very momentary. The shadow can show up when emotional harmony becomes a prerequisite for desire. So you might silence your own wants just to keep the peace because you need that harmony in place to feel aroused. Or believe that sex can only happen once. Everything is emotionally clear. So it's like if there is any kind of feeling or sense of conflict or any feeling of disagreement or unrest, then you can't have any physical intimacy. The harmonizer reminds us that desire isn't just about bodies, it's about trust. But intimacy doesn't have to be perfect to be real. That's both sides of that archetype. Then we have the taker. I've struggled with the name for this archetype, and I settled on taker. I think taker is kind of fun. It's kind of a shock value word, and it carries a lot of charge, that word taker. This is one that I very much relate to. And so when I describe it, it might be the opposite, actually, or an opposite to what you were thinking it would be. A taker, in the context of these archetypes, is someone who thrives A taker is someone who thrives in receiving, in being wanted, in being chosen. There's confidence here. There's like this embodied sense of, yes, I want whatever, ... But culturally, we don't give much permission for this, especially not to women. This component to my identity and the archetype that, again, I resonate naturally with was difficult for me. And it's still, I struggle with sometimes because I feel selfish. I feel like I'm constantly taking because I love it when my partner is just giving all of the pleasure and I should be giving it back. But with my partner, we complement each other really well because he is actually aroused by the giving. So I have to reteach myself that this isn't about selfish or unselfish. It's simply what I have developed and how I've developed in my sexual identity. Wanting can feel very risky because there's a chance that maybe you don't get what you want. And receiving, like I said, can feel selfish. And there's often shame that can get tangled up here. So unchecked, taker energy can drift into entitlement or passivity. If I got to the point where, I enjoy receiving so much, I'm not even going to consider how I can give. That's passivity. Or I go into a situation assuming that I should be given to, right? So that's the shadow side of taker. But integrated taker energy is powerful. It invites generosity. It creates reciprocity. It reminds us that receiving is not the opposite of giving. It's all part of the same circuit. All right, the final archetype. This archetype does not actually exist in the quizzes online. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but there are some quizzes and some like a little archetype quizzes that you can take on the website whisperlounge.com. And Shapeshifter's not included there, mainly because I haven't figured out the technology well enough yet to provide it. But essentially, Shapeshifter will look like you have almost the same score in every category. If this is you, you probably recognize pieces of yourself in all of these archetypes. So you maybe are very adaptive. You respond. You might shift depending on context or partner. I also have a friend who I think would consider themselves a shapeshifter. And they would say that it's actually, yes, there's adaptability there, but there's also where it can be difficult for them to feel satisfied because they need to be met and connected with on all levels of these archetypes. So that's an interesting side to the shapeshifter as well. The shadow to the shapeshifter could be maybe losing your center. You might mirror others without checking in with what you want, or you might feel unsure where your desire begins and someone else's ends. But the shapeshifter reminds us that erotic identity doesn't have to be static, but it does need awareness. So these are the erotic archetypes. I'm very excited about these because I really think they've given me so much more language to talk with people and to explore for myself, within myself. the giver, the driver, the explorer, the harmonizer, the taker, and shapeshifter. You are not meant to pick one and stay there forever. Please don't do that. You're meant to just notice patterns. And when you do, things soften. Confusion can turn into clarity. Shame becomes curiosity, transforms. Patterns then turn into choices. And none of this means that you're broken, obviously. It means that you're human. So in the next episode, we're going to talk about the shadows of these archetypes because every strength has one. So we'll dive more into the shadows because if you have dealt with shame or have dealt with um, just difficulty around really knowing who you are sexually, it's often because we are wrapped up somewhat in the shadows. We're going to talk about that in the next episode, and we'll do that for the arousal archetypes as well. We'll talk about the arousal archetypes, and then we'll have an episode where we discuss the shadows. If you're curious to explore this more, obviously, you can take the erotic archetype quiz at whisperlounge.club. You'll go into the store at whisperlounge.club and you'll see it there as one of the products. But even if you don't take the quiz, I hope this gave you permission to look at yourself with more compassion. Look at your relationship with more compassion. Look at your partners with more compassion. Your erotic style isn't something to fix. It's something really just to be understood. I appreciate you guys showing up and listening. I'm really excited about these archetypes in this curriculum, and I hope it brings you some clarity and fun along the way. So thanks for being here, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for being here. Tip the lounge or grab your free journal while it lasts at whisperlounge.club.